February 26, 1991, 9:45 in the evening. The Kuwait Desert, 40 kilometers east of the Iraq-Kuwait border. Staff Sergeant Stephen Nace occupies the gunner's station in his M1A1 Abrams tank, positioned in the turret with his face pressed against the eyepiece of the AN-TAS-4 thermal imaging sight. Outside the tank, conditions are pitch black. Heavy overcast blocks any moonlight, and natural visibility for human eyes is less than 100 meters. Anyone standing outside would see essentially nothing beyond vague shapes close by. But Nace's thermal sight displays a clear image in shades of white and gray, showing the desert landscape as variations in temperature rather than visible light. Hot objects appear bright white, cool objects appear dark, and everything in between displays ingredients that create remarkably clear imagery. At 2,800 meters, nearly 2 miles, Nace detects a bright white signature that training and experience immediately identify. An Iraqi T-72 main battle tank. The vehicle's diesel engine creates heat, exhaust gases rise from vents, and even the whole metal warmed by the engine creates sufficient temperature differential that thermal sensors detect it clearly at extreme range. Nace immediately calls to his tank commander, Captain H.R. McMaster, positioned in the commander's station above and behind him. Identified T-72, range 2,800. McMaster, monitoring his own commander's independent thermal viewer that provides him separate thermal sight independent of the gunner as, confirms the target and issues engagement clearance. Fire. Nace centers his crosshairs on the T-72's center mass, ensuring the laser rangefinder has accurate distance measurement. The Abrams fire control computer processes range, data, ammunition type, barrel wear, crosswind, air temperature, and target motion, calculating precise aim point that compensates for all these factors. The ballistic solution appears on Nace's sight display, and he makes final adjustment to center the aiming reticle. He squeezes the firing trigger. The 120mm M2 F86 smoothbore gun fires with tremendous blast and recoil that the Abrams' suspension absorbs, launching an M829A1 depleted uranium sabot, round down range at approximately 1,670 meters per second. Flight time to the target 2,800 meters away is 2.6 seconds. The penetrator, a long dart of depleted uranium optimized for armor penetration, strikes the T-72's turret front at an angle that allows it to penetrate the composite armor, continuing through into the crew compartment and ammunition storage. The Iraqi crew inside that T-72 never saw Nace's Abrams. Their TPN-3 infrared searchlight was activated, projecting invisible infrared light that their night vision equipment used to see targets. But the searchlight's 800-meter effective range meant they couldn't detect anything at 2,800 meters where the Abrams was positioned. They had fired their own 125mm gun moments earlier, shooting randomly toward where they heard engine sounds and thought they detected movement, but without target acquisition, their round went nowhere near any American vehicle. The M829A1 penetrator impact was the first indication they received that American armor had detected their position. The Battle of 73 Easting was underway, and Iraqi armor was about to discover that fighting American tanks at night was fundamentally different from any combat scenario Soviet doctrine had prepared them for. To understand Iraqi confidence in T-72 night fighting capability, you need to understand what they possessed and what Soviet doctrine taught them about armored warfare after dark. The T-72 main battle tank entered Soviet service in 1971, representing the Soviet Union's primary third-generation tank design. Iraq acquired hundreds of T-72s during the 1980s, receiving export variants that incorporated most capabilities of Soviet Army versions with some downgraded systems. The tank was impressive by Soviet standards. 125mm smoothbore gun with autoloader composite armor incorporating steel and ceramic layers for protection against kinetic and chemical energy rounds. 780 horsepower diesel engine providing reasonable mobility, and a 3-man crew that Soviet designers considered optimal for reducing vehicle size while maintaining combat effectiveness. Iraqi tankers received training emphasizing T-72 advantages over older tanks they'd operated. The 125mm gun could penetrate Western armor at combat ranges, the composite protection could resist most anti-tank weapons Iraq might face, and the mobility allowed tactical maneuvers that older tanks couldn't execute. Iraqi commanders believed T-72s provided capability roughly equivalent to American M1 Abrams. Both were modern designs, both incorporated advanced armor and weapons. Both represented their respective nation's primary battle tank. Soviet advisors who trained Iraqi crews reinforced this assessment, teaching that proper employment of T-72 capabilities would create effective defensive positions that attacking forces would struggle to overcome. Night vision equipment on Iraqi T-72s consisted primarily of the TPN-3 infrared searchlight system. This was active infrared technology. The searchlight projected infrared light invisible to human eyes, but detectable by the gunner's infrared sight, effectively creating a flashlight that only people with infrared viewers could see. The system worked adequately under some conditions, providing night vision capability where none existed otherwise, but it suffered from critical limitations. The searchlight's effective range was approximately 800 meters, sufficient for close-range engagements, but inadequate for the 2,000-plus meter ranges where modern tank combat often occurred. More problematically, the active infrared searchlight was clearly visible to anyone with infrared detectors, meaning activating the searchlight immediately revealed the T-72's position to enemy forces equipped to detect infrared emissions. American thermal sights detected infrared searchlights effortlessly, making Iraqi tanks using this equipment visible at extreme ranges. The backup optical system, designated 1K13, provided coincidence range-finding capability that allowed gunners to estimate range and engage targets using optical sights, but this approach required visible light, moonlight, starlight, or battlefield illumination, to see targets. In total darkness, optical systems were useless. Iraqi night fighting doctrine emphasized defensive positions, where T-72s would wait for attacking forces to approach, using searchlights briefly to detect targets before engaging and then shutting down to avoid revealing position. Soviet doctrine assumed that attackers faced similar night vision limitations, creating tactical parity where both sides struggled with darkness. Iraqi commanders believed defensive positions with T-72s were secure at night because American forces couldn't engage targets they couldn't see. What Iraqi doctrine never addressed was the possibility that American forces possessed night vision technology a full generation ahead of Soviet systems, passive thermal imaging that required no active illumination, operated at ranges exceeding 3,000 meters, and worked equally well in total darkness, smoke, dust, or adverse weather. American thermal technology inverted every assumption Iraqi doctrine was built upon. The M1 Abrams that would shatter these assumptions began development in the 1970s as the United States Army's replacement for the M60 Patton tank. The M1 entered service in 1980, and the improved M1A1 variant with a 120mm gun began fielding in 1985. By Desert Storm in 1991, most American armor units operated M1A1 variants that incorporated lessons from early M1 operations and technological improvements that had matured during the 1980s. The ANTAS-4 thermal imaging sight installed in M1A1 Abrams represented revolutionary capability in armored warfare. Thermal imaging operates on fundamentally different principles than image intensification or active infrared. Rather than amplifying existing light or projecting infrared illumination, thermal sensors detect infrared radiation naturally emitted by all objects based on their temperature. Everything warmer than absolute zero emits infrared radiation in wavelengths that thermal sensors can detect. The ANTAS-4 used sensors cooled to extremely low temperatures, making them sensitive to temperature differences as small as 0.5 degrees Celsius. When viewing through thermal sights, hot objects appear bright white, cool objects appear dark, and intermediate temperatures display in grayscale gradients. The result is remarkably clear imagery that reveals vehicles, equipment, and even personnel through their thermal signatures, regardless of lighting conditions. The tactical advantages thermal imaging provided were comprehensive. Detection range exceeded 3,000 meters for vehicle-sized targets under most conditions, far beyond what active infrared or image intensification could achieve. The system worked equally well day or night. Thermal imaging didn't depend on sunlight or ambient light, so darkness created no disadvantage. Smoke and dust that blocked visible light were often transparent to thermal sensors because they didn't significantly block infrared radiation at the wavelengths thermal systems detected. Weather conditions that degraded other sensors often had minimal effect on thermal performance. Most critically, thermal imaging was entirely passive. It detected radiation emitted by targets rather than projecting anything, meaning Abrams tanks using thermal sights were undetectable to enemy forces. Iraqi tanks activating infrared searchlights broadcasted their positions to anyone watching, while Abrams thermal sights detected Iraqi tanks without revealing American positions. The commander's independent thermal viewer provided additional capability that multiplied crew effectiveness. The CITV gave the tank commander his own thermal sight independent of the gunner's system, allowing the commander to search for additional targets while the gunner engaged current targets. This two-person target acquisition substantially increased the rate at which Abrams crews could detect and engage multiple threats. Iraqi T-72s with a single night vision system could only search for or engage one target at a time, creating tactical disadvantage when facing multiple threats. The 120mm M256 smoothbore gun that armed M1A1 Abrams was a German design licensed for American production, providing substantially greater armor penetration than the 105mm gun on original M1 variants. The fire control system integrated thermal sight, laser rangefinder, and ballistic computer into a comprehensive targeting solution. The laser rangefinder provided accurate target distance measurement to 3,950 meters. The ballistic computer processed range data along with ammunition characteristics, barrel wear, meteorological conditions, and vehicle motion to calculate precise aim point. The gun stabilization system allowed accurate firing while the tank was moving. The gun remained pointed at the target regardless of vehicle motion over rough terrain. Iraqi T-72s used less sophisticated fire control that required the tank to stop before firing accurately, creating tactical disadvantage against Abrams that could fire effectively while maneuvering. Crew training amplified these technological advantages. United States Army tank crews trained extensively, accumulating 200-plus hours of training annually, including substantial night operations practice. Crews repeatedly practiced target detection through thermal sights, engagement procedures, ammunition selection, and tactical maneuvers until actions became automatic. Iraqi tank crews received approximately 20 to 30 hours of training annually due to budget constraints and limited fuel for training exercises, with minimal night operations training because Soviet doctrine emphasized daylight operations and Iraqi forces lacked facilities for comprehensive night training. The AGT 1500 gas turbine engine powering the Abrams produced 2,500 horsepower, providing excellent acceleration and 45 mph top speed. The gas turbine consumed enormous quantities of fuel, a significant logistical burden, but provided abundant electrical power for all vehicle systems, including the energy-intensive thermal sights. The four-man crew configuration, commander, gunner, loader, and driver, was more manpower intensive than T-72's three-man crew, but provided advantages in situational awareness and sustained operations, because workload was distributed across more personnel. When these technological and training advantages met Iraqi armor during Desert Storm's ground campaign, the results were devastatingly one-sided. The Battle of 73 Easting on February 26-27, 1991, provided the clearest demonstration of thermal imaging dominance in armored warfare. The 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment, conducting reconnaissance operations into Iraqi-occupied Kuwait, encountered elements of the Iraqi Republican Guard Tawakalna Division occupying defensive positions. The engagement began around 2000, 30 hours under conditions of total darkness, overcast skies, eliminated moonlight, and visibility for naked eye observers was less than 100 meters. Abrams tank commanders and gunners, scanning with thermal sights, detected Iraqi T-72 positions at ranges between 2,500 and 3,000 meters. The thermal signatures were unmistakable. Hot engine compartments, exhaust heat, and metal warmed by diesel engines created bright white images against the cooler desert background. American forces had complete situational awareness of Iraqi positions before closing to engagement range. As American tanks advanced, crews maintained continuous surveillance through thermal sights, identifying Iraqi vehicles, determining their types, and preparing engagement priorities. When American forces closed to optimal engagement distance, approximately 2,000 to 2,500 meters, they began systematic engagement of Iraqi armor. Iraqi forces, meanwhile, saw essentially nothing. Their active infrared searchlights couldn't detect American tanks at 2,500-meter range, and without searchlight illumination, their night vision equipment was useless. Some Iraqi crews activated their searchlights, attempting to locate American forces, immediately revealing their positions to American thermal sights and drawing immediate engagement. Other Iraqi crews, trained to fire at sound when they couldn't see targets, fired randomly toward engine noises or muzzle flashes from American guns. Without target acquisition, these shots went nowhere near American positions. Iraqi commanders attempted to organize withdrawal, but thermal sights tracked every Iraqi vehicle movement, allowing American forces to engage targets systematically as they tried to reposition or retreat. The engagement results were absolute. 9 M1A1 Abrams tanks engaged 28 Iraqi T-72 main battle tanks and 16 T-55 older generation tanks. Every Iraqi vehicle was either disabled or neutralized. American forces suffered 0 tank losses during the engagement. The technological advantage was so decisive that Iraqi armor never achieved effective return fire. A typical engagement sequence illustrates the disparity. Abrams crew spots Iraqi T-72 thermal signature at 2,430 meters. The gunner uses laser rangefinder to measure exact distance. Fire control computer calculates ballistic solution accounting for range, temperature, and ammunition. Gunner fires a 120 millimeter sabot round. Flight time is 2 to 3 seconds. Round impacts T-72, penetrating armor and disabling vehicle. Iraqi T-72 crew experiences the engagement completely differently. They detect nothing until the round impacts their tank, having never seen the Abrams that engaged them. The Battle of Norfolk on February 27, 1991, repeated these patterns on larger scale. The 2nd Brigade, 1st Armored Division, engaged more than 300 Iraqi armored vehicles over 6 hours of sustained combat under similar night conditions. American forces lost 4 Abrams tanks and 6 Bradley fighting vehicles, all to friendly fire accidents in the dust and darkness as American units maneuvered in close proximity without adequate coordination. Iraqi forces lost more than 280 tanks, including T-72, T-55, and T-62 models, plus more than 100 other armored vehicles. The thermal sight advantage proved even more decisive during this engagement because the massive vehicle movements and weapons fire created enormous dust clouds that reduced visible light observation to near zero. Iraqi crews were completely blind in the dust, unable to see anything through optical sights or active infrared systems that dust blocked. American thermal sights continued detecting Iraqi vehicles, clearly because the dust was largely transparent to thermal imaging. Crews could see through dust clouds as if they didn't exist, maintaining full situational awareness while Iraqi forces operated blind. The technology gap between American thermal imaging and Iraqi night vision systems extended across multiple dimensions, each contributing to American dominance in night combat. The fundamental sensor approach, passive thermal versus active infrared, created a situation where American systems detected targets at extreme range without revealing their positions, while Iraqi systems required active emissions that immediately revealed locations. This asymmetry meant American tanks always detected Iraqi positions first, achieving first-shot advantage that proved decisive given the lethality of 120mm guns against Iraqi armor. The fire control integration provided second critical advantage. American systems incorporated thermal sights into comprehensive fire control that included laser range-finding ballistic computers and stabilized guns. Crews could detect targets through thermal sights, obtain precise range with laser, have the computer calculate exact aim point, and fire accurately while moving. Iraqi systems required separate steps with manual procedures: detect target with searchlight, estimate range optically, manually calculate ballistic solution, stop vehicle to fire accurately. The time difference between American automated targeting and Iraqi manual procedures measured in tens of seconds, an eternity in armored combat where engagements were decided in seconds. The armor protection disparity compounded Iraqi disadvantages. M1A1 Abrams incorporated composite armor with depleted uranium mesh that provided extreme protection against kinetic energy penetrators. Iraqi 125mm sabot rounds couldn't penetrate Abrams frontal armor at any range where engagements occurred. Some hits on Abrams' side or rear armor achieved penetration, but frontal protection was essentially impervious to Iraqi weapons. Iraqi T-72 armor, while incorporating composite materials, couldn't resist American 120mm sabot rounds at combat ranges. American guns could penetrate Iraqi armor frontally at 3,000+ meters, creating engagement envelope where Abrams could engage successfully, but Iraqi return fire was ineffective. Training differences, while less technologically dramatic, proved equally important. American crews had practiced night fighting extensively, developing proficiency with thermal sights and comfort operating in darkness. Iraqi crews received minimal night training, operating primarily during daylight and considering nighttime defensive positions, where limited visibility protected them from attack. When forced to fight American armor at night, Iraqi training deficits meant they couldn't effectively employ even the limited capabilities their equipment provided. The legacy of Desert Storm tank battles fundamentally reshaped armored warfare doctrine worldwide. The thermal imaging dominance that American forces demonstrated convinced military planners globally that thermal sights were essential for competitive armored forces. By the 2000s, every modern main battle tank incorporated thermal imaging as standard equipment. NATO established thermal sight specifications as baseline requirements for member nation tank forces. The technology that provided American advantages in 1991 became universal expectation for capable armor by the 21st century. Russian responses to American thermal dominance during Desert Storm included accelerated development of thermal systems for Russian armor. The T-90 main battle tank that entered Russian service in the 1990s incorporated thermal sights, though initial variants used French thermal technology because Russian thermal sensor production lagged Western capabilities. Russian domestic thermal systems eventually matured sufficiently for indigenous production, but Western assessment consistently concluded that Russian thermal sights remained inferior to American equivalents in detection range, resolution, and reliability. The M1 Abrams continues operational service today with the United States Army and multiple allied nations. Modern variants incorporate third-generation thermal imaging with improved resolution and detection ranges exceeding original ANTAS-4 capabilities. The platform has received continuous upgrades to fire control systems, armor protection, and auxiliary systems while maintaining the fundamental design that proved so successful during Desert Storm. The combat record established in 1991, overwhelming victories in night engagements against numerically superior Iraqi forces, validated the design philosophy that prioritized crew survivability, thermal sight capability, and gun lethality over other considerations. When Staff Sergeant Nace fired that first engagement at 73 Easting, he was executing tactics enabled by technology that Iraqi forces had no equivalent for. Soviet doctrine that trained Iraqi tank crews assumed both sides faced similar limitations in darkness. That night created conditions where detection ranges were limited, target acquisition was difficult, and defensive positions enjoyed advantages over attacking forces. American thermal imaging invalidated every assumption this doctrine relied upon. Iraqi T-72 crews trained to fight in darkness found themselves functionally blind against opponents who saw clearly at extreme ranges. The thermal signatures that Iraqi tanks couldn't avoid creating, hot engines, exhaust gases, warmed metal, became liabilities that revealed their positions to American sensors, while Iraqi crews detected nothing until American rounds impacted their vehicles. The technological asymmetry was so complete that engagements became one-sided despite Iraqi numerical superiority at some positions, despite Iraqi armor occupying defensive positions that traditional doctrine suggested should provide advantages. Iraqi T-72 crews fought bravely under conditions where their training and equipment left them effectively helpless. They fired their weapons blindly in darkness toward sounds and muzzle flashes, not because they lacked courage or skill, but because their night vision equipment simply couldn't detect American armor at the ranges where engagements occurred. They attempted tactical maneuvers, repositioning, withdrawing, concentrating fires, but every movement was tracked by American thermal sights that made darkness irrelevant. American crews, meanwhile, operated with complete situational awareness, provided by thermal imaging that revealed every Iraqi position clearly regardless of light conditions, smoke, or dust. The night belonged to those who could see through it, and thermal technology gave American armor a sight that Iraqi forces couldn't match. Iraqi T-72 crews fought in darkness. Abrams crews owned the night.